Hello and welcome. My name is Allison Van, and I am the Executive Director of CRESS, the Center for Research in Empirical Social Sciences here at McMaster University. I'd like us to begin by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the lands where McMaster stands. To say that is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. This series, Relevant Research, is hosted by the Sherman Center for Digital Scholarship with generous funding from SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. As many of you already know, Mihaela is a social and data scientist passionate about the intersection between research, communication, and design. Research Retold, the research communication service of which he is the founder and director, seeks to make research accessible and positively impact society. Welcome back, Mihaela.
Hello, it's nice to see everyone again. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces and names, so thank you for joining us again today. So welcome to the second and final session on our interactive series on communicating research beyond academia. And today we're really going to dig deeper into that as one of the building blocks for the communications plan. So there are people who have not watched the video. Thanks to those who have. We will be playing just a short segment today, just 4.5 minutes of just the most relevant part of the video for everyone's sake. And 3 of you have not downloaded the worksheet. If you could check in your inbox, Michelle has sent an email with a link to the worksheet. It will be very helpful for you to have feedback from the last session. Mentioned the worksheet was helpful to take notes and just have a more organized way to go through the content, because it is quite a lot to go through. But just wanted to show you where I am in the world. I'm currently in the UK and it's the afternoon here. So I'm very happy to be able to still connect with you, even though I sadly am unable to travel to Canada this time. So a bit of housekeeping. Someone has just joined us now, so I'm not sure if they have attended or not, but just as a reminder, we'll have a mix of engaging activities, breakout rooms. If you can keep the video on if you want, that would help me to see your faces. It gives me that little bit of human interaction that I so very much want. And we'll have these icons throughout the session just to help you navigate the content. And if you meet anyone that you really strike a great conversation with, a lot of good conversations happened last time, you can always connect with them later. You can email Cheryl at cress@mcmaster.ca and connect with people. So this is the workshop worksheet, which you can download at the link Michelle put in the chat. And just as a recap, last week we had a video that talked about the 5 reasons to communicate your research beyond academia. That is available and will be available for you to watch whenever you want. We've had a session on the central message of your research, really challenging you to be very concise and articulate when it comes to communicating what your research message is. And then today we've got a video on the 5 building blocks, a little bit of theory, nothing too dry or technical, but just to get you knowing the theory behind the 5 building blocks. And then finally today we're actually going to give you as much practical advice and guidance on designing the communications plan as possible. So really today the purpose is to get guidance and feedback on your communication plans and really the process of creating one. So we'll cover the 5 building blocks, go through them, have some exercises, and then talk at the end about resources, risks, and evaluation, and really see what kind of support is available for you after this workshop. When you're planning to implement this in the real world, we'll give you some practical directions for you to go in. Okay, so that was a very quick introduction. I'm now going to share my screen and share with you those 4 minutes of the video that I think will really just put us all on the same page rather than me having to repeat all of that information again. So I'm going to quickly go to the relevant section and then I will be back with you after you watch the video.
A communications plan is a document that helps you answer these 5 questions. What are you trying to achieve? Who are you targeting with your communications? What message are you aiming to get across? When will you reach your audience? And finally, how are you going to distribute that message? If you need to be strategic about how you communicate your message to the world, then having a detailed document that helps you answer those questions from before will be very useful to you, because it helps to align you and your team. It helps to clarify what you're trying to achieve. It gives you time to plan for resources. And finally, it maximizes the impact of your hard work. The first step is to set the goals and objectives of your research communication plan. And here, the more specific and measurable your objectives are, then the more focused and efficient your communications can be. Here are some examples of objectives of being as specific as possible. Remember that developing objectives is an iterative process. So whilst in the beginning of your research journey, you might be focused on raising awareness about your study, towards the latter parts of your research, once you have announced your findings, you might be focused on building influence. Also, goals should not just focus on outputs, meaning how many events you organized, for example, but also on outcomes, meaning any actions that people took as a result of attending those events. And finally, aim for 3 objectives or less.
Actually, as I'm doing that, I realize I'm going to play the relevant section before each of the relevant sections, rather than have you all watch 6 minutes now and then lose you. I don't want to lose you. I want to keep you as engaged as possible. So I'm going to stop the video now, and that will be the next section that we will go through after we talk about the goals. So as a little recap, so we just talked about the goals at the moment. That's what we'll be focusing now. I'm just going to launch a quick poll and ask you, have you ever written a communications plan, or is this the first time that you are engaging in this kind of activity? So there's a poll now popping up on your screen. So we do have 4 people in the group today who have written one, which is great. I'd love for you to, contribute and share lessons today with those who haven't. But really, the aim of today is to help those who have never written one. You've got the worksheet, which is something that you can always come back to and fill in when you are ready to develop one for a specific research project. And in the session, you actually get to hear live examples and experiences from those who have as well. Okay, so from the video, we already got this, these are the 5 main building blocks. And today we're going to go through each of them, have some practical exercises to help you bring these to life. So in the video, we talked about the goals, and these are some specific examples of the goals that I've shared in the video. And again, what I want to stress when it comes to the goals is to use timelines or milestones, activities that would make you be as specific as possible. I'm sure you all heard about SMART objectives, making sure that they're measurable and actionable and time specific. But really, without that jargon, what we're trying to get across here is that you're not just saying, I want to increase awareness about my research. You're really trying to put some meat on the bones and say exactly how you're going to do it and give yourself a deadline. So the other example was, for example, we'll raise awareness in audience A. So you're really targeting a specific audience. And what findings do you want to share more information about the risk of a specific aspect of your research? Between what date. So what I want to do now is to launch you all in a pair work exercise for you to have a chat with your partner about the main objective for communicating your research. I mean, you are attending this session because I imagine you want to communicate what you're doing in a more strategic and targeted way. And there's a very specific goal you have in mind. And I'd like you to share that with your partner, whether you wrote this in your worksheet. And if you haven't, you're thinking about it now based on the video and the information I've given you, and you can write a few notes in your worksheet. So I'm going to put you all in breakout rooms now. Does that all sound good with everyone? Anyone would like to raise their hand? Anyone would like to share their goals? There's no right or wrong answer for your goal, just sharing what you've been talking about in the breakout rooms. There we go. Elaine, go ahead.
Okay, so I lucked out and I had Allison. So she does this stuff all the time. So I was like, so what we talked about was really who is it that I should be talking to?
Right.
And that's been a big ongoing struggle. And you know, I want a social class revolution, and I don't know if I can get that happening by, you know, next week.
Mm.
So yeah, so we talked about those goals, how I could think about those, and what else was it, Allison? Impact versus measuring stuff. Impact may just be the most I can hope for. That's not in a negative way. So
Yeah.
yes, we talked about two broad audiences inside Canadian universities, but how might we get people in Canadian society to see this ongoing injustice that goes on?
Yep.
And
Any specific timelines or kind of specific or other specific aspects apart from the people? Was there a sort of a timeline that you had in mind around sharing insights about your research?
well, I have to do a big rollout of my research July, August.
Mm-hmm.
And I do put my research out there every single day. But that will be the big rollout, and then I will be finished university as well.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. Anyone else would like to share? Let's see who else has raised their hand. What other goals or other interesting insights that you came up with during the breakout room? Let's see. Emily DeSante.
Okay. Hi.
Hello.
So I was lucky. Hello. We talked a little bit about the overall communication message of the research that I work on and the specific goal. I don't think we talked about the specifics, but I did write one down, and it's that my research team will implement our Strengthening a Palliative Approach in Long-Term Care palliative toolkit in 3 long-term care homes in Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Ontario between January 2021 and October 2021.
Great. So you know exactly, you know, what settings you're going to be sharing it, who you're going to be sharing it with, and also the time for that, the timeline for that. That's great. So hopefully throughout the day, you'll have more clarity as well on kind of the formats that would be most helpful, and the messages for those people, you know, what will resonate most with them. And then one last person, let's see if we can chat with, there we go, G Hooks. I'm not sure what your first name is. Gooks? What's your first name?
My name is Greg Hooks.
Greg Hooks. Gooks. Yes, Greg.
Yes,
Go.
maybe I have to work on my screen presence there instead of Hooks.
I can't maybe I can rename you. There we go. I'm gonna rename you Greg Hooks. Super. Go ahead.
So this is fairly far along. So I actually am volunteering because I would be interested in some advice. So I did a study. I'm in sociology. It's a social science methodologies where I gathered data on all of the COVID-19 cases in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then I link that to prisons in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And the findings are that something between 10 and 15% of all the cases in the United States can be traced back to prisons. As of August 1st, we estimate that over 400,000 cases can be traced to prisons. And if a country reported that to the World Health Organization on August 1st, it would have been 5th in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so the messages about the massive community transmission of COVID-19 linked to mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
I've collaborated with an advocacy group in the United States who are, and they have a media person who's co-authoring the main report, and we offload the statistics to a standalone separate report that I'm doing. So
Yeah.
the target audience is the mass media at first, and also we delayed the rollout of this for the post-Trump administration so that it would get the ear possibly of incoming Biden administration who has concerns over managing the pandemic and also mass incarceration.
Right.
There's a companion report that does very similar things with immigrant detention centers, and that accounts for something a lower magnitude, but a similar story of callously mismanaged detention centers having a very intense COVID outbreak and then it getting out into the community. So that anyway, so it's kind of structured in a way, but I would be interested in any kind of critique or advice about or suggestions for getting the word out.
So in terms of a specific goal that you have, is it ultimately you're trying to help decision makers better manage, ultimately reduce the amount of case transmissions in prisons and basically
Well,
improve the
the ultimate goal is to back off on mass incarceration in the United States and to back off. I mean, there are two separate reports in the second audience, but it's a similar data set and things like that. And the second one is for the U.S. to dial back its harsh treatment of immigrants.
I think it kind of comes back to Elaine's, what she was saying around having this kind of big goal and then figuring out what is the achievable kind of, well, there's like a short-term goal, medium-term, and then obviously the long-term, almost your legacy as a researcher and you know, what you're working towards. I think
in terms of an immediate goal along those lines is to drive home the point to the policy advisors to the Biden administration that management of the pandemic is linked to these reforms of criminal justice and immigrant detention. That they're not separate; they're one and the same.
Okay, that's so it's good we identify that short term. If you can write that down, and then we can work on that throughout the session, especially when it comes to who exactly, what is the audience, who's the person in the administration who will be most receptive to this message and what kind of messages they will be open to. So I've noted that down, and then if we don't get the answers in this session, we can always have another conversation after the session. Okay, so thank you so much for the volunteers who shared the goals. As we were segueing into the conversation with Greg about the audience and the messages, to really get specific on, you know, we have this goal, for example, of making that connection between management of the pandemic being linked to justice reforms in the criminal system. Who do we need to communicate this to, and what messages are they going to respond to? So I'm going to quickly share the video and share the segment in the video where we talk about the audience and communications for those of you who joined us, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So you should all be hearing the video right about now.
The second step is to define your target audience. And here we might be dealing with more than one audience. So try to focus on the three most important. If you understand your most important audiences, then you can tailor your communications and messages to their interests and needs. To figure out who your most important audiences are, ask yourself, who could we engage with to achieve our communications objectives and why? If possible, this brainstorming can be done as a group so you can bring different ideas and perspectives to it. And finally, when defining your audience, again, you want to be as specific as possible, just like with your objectives. For example, instead of being vague and saying policymakers, you want to think about what department they're from, you know, what committee they might be part of. Could you get their name and contact details? So really drilling down to exactly who you're trying to target.
Okay, so as we were saying there, you know, when we say someone in the Biden administration seems to be like a very, very vague audience. So trying to understand exactly what department and what team, what's their remit, and being really focused and trying to understand who that audience target is. And that's what we'll be doing in this exercise. So I want to quickly share another poll with you, just as a question to you in terms of the audience that you are targeting. So we did this last week, but if you could take a moment to select, you know, what is the audience that you're most focused on for this communications plan that you are working on today. What is the non-academic audience you'd like to engage with about your research? And there should be a poll popping up on your screen now. We've got the general public, public sector, private sector, third sector, or the media. And so for the exercise we'll be doing now, I want you to keep this audience in mind and really challenge yourself to find out as many characteristics about them as you can and be as specific as you can. Okay, let's end the poll and share the results. So most of you are interested to engage with the public sector, so policymakers, civil servants, should be there, local governments. And then we've got the media, the general public, and then SMEs and the third sector. for those of you who haven't attended last week, in the recording, you will find some specific pointers of how to engage with all of the audiences from the poll. And so it should provide you with some guidance as you're thinking about how to engage with your desired audience. So for the purposes of today, I want to do a live example with one of you. So would anyone like to share their main audience and key messages that we are targeting? I just realized now that we're doing messages as well as the audience. So I'm going to play the part in the video where I also talk about the messages that you want to identify when engaging with your audience. And then we'll do this live example where I'd like to hear from one of you, and then we'll go through these specific questions just so we can see how this example will be created in real life.
Once you've defined your audience, it's important to do some research on them, and this information will help you tailor your messages to them. For each audience, ask yourself, what is their current view or position on this topic? What changes would I want to see happen as a result of them understanding my research? And finally, what is your hook? Meaning, what message from your research will most likely capture their attention? Is it an economic argument? Is it a social justice argument? Or perhaps they're most compelled by environmental reasons? Whatever it is, you need to extract that message from your research and meet them halfway where they will respond to what you have to say. You might be asking yourself, well, how can I find this out? Well, you can start by looking at their online profiles. You can look at their social media profiles or perhaps their articles that they share. Does that give you an insight into what their position is? Another way is they're part of an organization, and that organization would have some sort of mission statement or value statement, and that could give you a glimpse into where they are coming from and how you can create those messages that will make them respond. At this stage, you want to get as much information on your audience as possible so you can be as targeted and focused with your communications as possible.
Brilliant. So would anyone like to share an example of their key audience that they've thought about? Perhaps they've put this answer in their worksheet, or perhaps they've just thought about their key audience right now in the session. If you could raise your hand, that would be great. And what we'll do is we're going to actually go through these questions. We'll go through these questions and then you can see how we would answer them in real life. So I'm going to make this bigger for you so you can see it. All right. We've got Elaine. I'm just going to wait and see if anyone else would like, maybe have someone who hasn't contributed to the session, would like to share. I know it's still the morning, so you're probably still waking up. Anyone else? If not, we'll. Okay. Yes, Elaine, would you like to share the audience that you're targeting with your communications plan? And then we can work this exercise together, and then everyone can kind of see how we can answer these questions to be as specific as possible. So who did you identify as your main audience then?
So, sorry, I also have a cat on my lap. Okay, sorry. One of my main audience is university administrators. So these would be associate deans, vice provosts, deans, and their current position on the topic is that it isn't, they may feel it's a problem, but it's...
Remind us again what the topic is.
Sorry. So it's how Canadian universities perpetuate social class elitism by not having any supports in place for students from poverty. And it's not part of, so yes, there are some leaders who think that this is bad. Candace quite behind, but it doesn't fall within the purview of equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Right.
So social class is excluded, and class discrimination, poverty discrimination in Canada continues to be legislated. So it's not in any of their strategic plans.
Okay, so I have so far topic: Canadian universities perpetuate social class elitism by not having students from poorer backgrounds.
From, no, specifically poverty.
Poverty. Just say from poverty. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good enough. Yeah.
Okie doke. So their current view on the topic is
is it's outside the scope of equity, diversity, inclusion, EDI. Because EDI does not include social class discrimination.
Yeah.
So, and this comes from the federal government level. So, and they just follow federal government, so.
Right, okay. So what changes would you like to happen as a result of them understanding your research and the importance of having individuals from poverty attend universities? What would you like them to do?
I would, well, a couple things is one is to understand discriminatory beliefs held about people from poverty. So that, because there's a tendency to think about people from poverty as deficit-based. So looking at those colonial class-based narratives, I would like them to go, you know, let's not just do the status quo in terms of EDI, that they would add social class discrimination.
Is this something that isn't within their ability or remit? Can they do this, or is it someone else
Absolutely.
above them? Okay.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
No one's telling Canadian universities that they can't use an intersectional lens with their EDI. No one is, but it's just a choice they've made. So,
okay.
So that would be like two big things. That would be great. So the other third thing, I suppose, would be that when they are thinking about how to widen access for students from poverty, it's not just the idea of have them get more student loans.
Right.
So it needs to be a more nuanced understanding.
Okay.
And then the fourth thing would be that any initiatives are not based on an assimilation model, because that's really important. Alice and I talked about it.
What is the alternative model that you'd like them? Not an assimilation model, but
that you honor the richness of our lived experiences and ancestral and kinship knowledges. So just that we bring amazing knowledge and skills and talents to university if we make it here. So
can you help me a little bit to capture this in writing? You said not in an assimilation model.
Yeah, I would, in Canada they would know. So it's just, it could be as simple as that. It's not about assimilating to the middle class higher education culture. You know, so the idea of social mobility, because your social class isn't good enough. Yeah, that's what be
assimilation. Okay. Yeah. And so what do you think, if you were to put yourself from the shoes of this dean or university administrator, what arguments do they respond to? You know, can we try to create some empathy with them and understand what do they care about, and how can you meet them halfway to show that this is something that they need to be needs to be looked at because it already meets some of their existing needs and activities.
So this is where I'm not very good at yet, is I'm still struggling to learn how to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
So so there's lots of, you know, all the marketing and communication materials out to prospective students and to donors is, you know, we're so wonderful and we care about our communities and we're all publicly funded universities and we have a responsibility to our communities. So how can I use that and say, well, what about this huge part of the population that you exclude, without saying it that way, because that's how I tend to say it.
So let's ask that question again. So so do these university administrators, I guess what I'm trying to do with this exercise is to help put you in the shoes of that person. And obviously they do care about their community and want to have the campus to be as diverse as possible? Can we go a layer beneath that and see what do they actually care about? Is there another perhaps driver that you may identify in thinking about what motivates them when they make decisions about these sort of things? So when they make decisions about equity, diversity, and inclusion, do they make them simply because it's a federal government exercise and that is it? In which case we need to, maybe the conversation needs to be moved at how do we change that kind of federal government criteria? Or is there something that can motivate these people to make this move, even if it's not something that the government asked them to do?
That's a really good question, because we are not a financially lucrative population, universities.
Yeah.
So
could I try? I mean,
please.
one thing might be to couch it in terms of regional development, right? There's a lot of research about how universities drive economic development and are engines for local economic development. And so, pitching it as a way that the university can amplify its economic impact in a particular region might speak to the way the university, certain particular universities like McMaster or Windsor, try to push for more provincial funding. So I think that might be the type of thing, like what are the goals that administrators have already, and how can you hook into those to show them that doing what you want them to do aligns with what they already want to do. They just don't see it yet.
That's brilliant. I'm just applied at a university, and they're talking about their responsibility as a regional university.
Yeah.
Versus they're not worried about, it's not all about the international rankings. So that's awesome, Michelle, because that's the struggle, right? The tensions of they want to be seen world renowned when, yeah. Anybody else? Idea?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. If anyone else wants to share, I mean, the purpose of doing a live exercise like this is to actually show that it is about trying to, exactly as Michelle said, see already what goals you can identify that your audience already has by looking at their mission statement, by looking at the organizations they're part of, and then plugging in what you are offering from your research into those so that they can pay attention. Because if it's not something that's on their radar at all, it is highly unlikely that they will even listen, because you will understand what it's like to have competing things for your attention and things you need to do. So hopefully this exercise was helpful for you all to see how this would happen in real life. And then this is the kinds of thing that you would be doing with your own research to really identify those specific messages in your communications. So, once you've uncovered that hook, expanding that and making sure that throughout your communications plan and in your messages to your audience, you mention those specific terms, and if you can use their language, the better, because they'll recognize that and be receptive to it. So we'll talk about the timing for now. I'm going to share the short segment of the video where we talk about timing. What do I mean by timing in terms of when you will reach out to your audience and how you can start thinking about those activities that you're putting together.
Once you figure out what messages you want to send those individuals, then you need to start thinking about when is the best time to engage them, and then reverse engineer your steps from your objectives. Now, on the screen now, I will show you some examples of timelines and activities. Again, the aim here is to work backwards from your objectives. Are there any activities or key dates that you need to keep in mind, and can we work backwards from that date? What activities need to happen between now and then? Creating a timeline of activities will help you see what messages are going to be told to whom and when. And this will also help you organize your resources and give you plenty of time for sign-offs and lead-in activities. And finally, you want to keep an eye on this timeline, as you will need to adjust it as necessary.
Okay, brilliant. So for the next exercise, I'm going to put you in, again, pair work for 5 minutes. And I want you to talk to your partner about your timeline of activities, meaning what are you planning to do to engage those audiences that you've identified and to achieve the goals that you've identified. So I'm going to launch the breakout rooms now and let you all have a discussion about your timing. Okay, everyone is back from the breakout room. So I hope you all had a discussion about the timeline of activities and timeline of activities and planning ahead for your communications activities. So the last building block we're going to be talking about are the channels and formats of communication, and really thinking about where your audience spends most of their time, as well as the messages that you think are the most appropriate. Now we're going to share with you some communication formats that could just make most sense for your audience. It could get you thinking about what you could be doing. So we'll start by talking about static formats of communication. Sorry, static formats of communication. You've got a list of these in the worksheet, so you can take notes about these as we go along. So let's start talking about the static ones. And these are examples I'm going to show you from the work that we create for researchers, where we help them communicate their findings in accessible and visual ways. And most of you are looking to engage with policymakers and individuals that work in policy. So a format that makes most sense for that is a policy brief. And so on the right-hand side here, you've got an example of a policy brief we created for health ministers in Mozambique, looking at this particular intervention, performance-based financing for health in low and middle income countries. So there was 8 health ministers in the room, and the researcher had 15 minutes to present the findings of a 3-year study in terms of challenges and opportunities with this particular way of financing health. So creating a short policy brief, 2 to 4 page maximum, when you're really getting to the heart of the policy issue. A policy brief is a really good way to engage with government bodies, policymakers. It's the most formal of the ones I will show you. It responds to specific gaps in evidence. So if the policymakers are looking to find specific evidence or to see specific evidence and they have a gap in that, a policy brief can support with that, and it supports in decision making because it includes recommendations and sort of implications, and next steps for what the policymaker could do if they are considering changing the policy in this way. So a policy brief is a format to consider. Another one I want to share with you is our infographics, more aimed at end users, the general public and practitioners. They're very effective at communicating, especially quantitative data, but mainly quantitative data. As you see here on the left-hand side, we've got an example from Fair Trade International, huge NGO that we are collaborating with, and they're showcasing this data through visuals and infographics to make sure that they're much more easier to digest than a massive Excel spreadsheet. They're great for visualizing data, and they're a very versatile format because you can put also supporting text, the narrative of the visual, and then the visual to support that. Brilliant. Moving on, visual summaries are what I would call a mix between some of the formality, if you will, of the policy brief. It has more text that you can put in it, but it's a visual summary because where you've got the opportunity, thank you so much, Alison, as well, where you've got the opportunity to include a visual, whether it's about the methodology or the problem or any sort of icon that would help bring the text to life. A visual summary is an ideal way to start a dialogue with stakeholders, and it combines that qualitative aspect and text about your research with some visuals to make it more digestible. So in the guide to communicating research beyond academia, which the participants, 3 participants got last week and 3 will get today, we go through a step-by-step process of producing a visual summary based on your research and really helping you think about the sections that you would include in a 2-page visual summary. Other formats that we shared are infocomics or perhaps illustrations, which are aimed more at the general public. They can be very creative and informal and easy to connect with readers, ideal for storytelling, and it can be very easy to follow, especially if your research has that kind of human element to it. From the examples that we were discussing today and the goals, if you think your research has a story to tell, the story of that person that comes from poverty and what would that mean for them to attend university, can you tell the story of that person to really bring it to life and show it to those making decisions in a much more, in a different way than perhaps they would be used to seeing it, like statistics or anything like that. So think about the story of your research, and this is where these formats come in handy. Now, a lot of the formats that we produce for researchers can be repurposed for a whole other hosts of channels for social media. So I'm going to show you an example from the University of Sheffield on the positive effects of music on sleep. And here's where you did this 2-page infographic on how music can help people who have sleeping problems. So I'm going to ask you, actually, I'm going to run a poll and ask you how many of you have Twitter. So I'm launching a poll now. Do you have a Twitter account? Yes or no? Okay, 10 out of 11. So most of you do have a Twitter account. 7 said yes, 4 said no. And I would say that if you don't have one, don't feel pressure that you have to open one. Your university or department would have a Twitter presence, and whether they can also support you in sharing your research. What I'm going to show you now is applicable still. And you can think of the institutional Twitter accounts or social media profiles that you could be using and collaborating with them to share your research in these formats that I'll show you right now. So you saw that 2-page infographic. This is a similar project that we did with Dr. Victoria Williamson, and we took visuals from that infographic and repurposed them for social media. So this is the source of the visual where we took them from. And it helped a lot to see how you can take sections from that infographic and then insert them for social media, and making sure that they are suited for purpose and that people can read parts of it in a more social media friendly way. So any discussion here about the formats that I've chosen that I've showed you, or any channels of communication, any thoughts about this particular aspect of the communication plan? And here, I've got a question from Laura about, are these easy to create on your own, or do you need a graphic designer? Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So that resource that is in the chat right now, canva.com, is basically, well, marketed as graphic design made simple, in the sense of it has some templates there. It's got some easy, easy materials that you can take and repurpose for your own use. Ying, yep, raise your hand.
Mute myself. Okay, in terms of the infocomic channel you mentioned about storytelling, what would you recommend? Because especially if you hire an artist, work on that, and then you get, how could you distribute that? I think it might have different way to distribute the comic from the normal academic research.
You mean, how do you distribute it rather than how you create it, right? How would you share?
Yes, you can hire an artist to work on and get a manga or get the story, right?
Yeah.
And the distribution, I'm not quite sure about that part.
Yeah, of course. So I'll give you the example of the researchers we worked with. They knew that they were going to meet people to explain that concept of social prescribing. So they were having workshops with people where they were, presenting the material, and that was one way to put that information either in front of them in a printed material or in a brochure, or then have it on the screen, and then be able to walk people through that story visually in a presentation. So that's one very simple, low-cost way to do it. I suppose another way, depending on your audience, and if there are any ways in which you could perhaps write a blog post, the comic itself can be lifted as an image, right? So you could insert that into a blog post that you could write on whether it's on your departmental website, or whether it is on perhaps the blog section of an organization you're collaborating with. Most
organizations nowadays would have like a blog section. So you could use that comic and insert it as a visual in a material that you're writing for your intended audience. So that would be, ways that come to mind right now. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Okie doke. So finally, in the last 10 minutes, I want to mention these 3 aspects: resources, risks, and evaluation. And these aspects are really, I want to draw your attention to them. They're most likely or most effectively going to be looked at if you're doing it in a group with your research team or with your supervisor or with your comms team, to really see what resources do you have available, what are the potential risks in you communicating your research. We talked about this last time, about it being potentially misinterpreted, and we can chat a bit more today about that. And then evaluation is, how are you going to know that you've achieved what you set out to achieve? And that's an important way to, something to really consider, is to know that you can be satisfied with your efforts, and then you can start another communications effort. So in terms of resources, something to think about here is, who do you need to assist you? So something that you probably got from this exercise is that it is a very, it is quite a time consuming or long process to develop a communications plan. Is not something quick and easy that you can do over lunch or something. You need to sit down and properly think about who you're targeting, and so you might need people to assist you and help you in this process. You might also need funds that you maybe have but never thought of using in this way, or funds that you could be applying to, or do you need to bid for extra funding to help you create some of these communication materials, or to help to create some of those formats that you need? So from whom and when? And before the workshop, I asked Michelle to send some information about the kind of internal resources that you could access at the university. So here's the things that we came up with. So the Faculty of Social Sciences researchers that are attending today should reach out to Erin Baxter Mello. So you've got the email address here. Faculty of Humanity researchers reaching out to Alison, who was with us in the session, but sadly she had to leave earlier. But someone mentioned that being in a room with her today, in a breakout room, is extremely helpful, because Alison has that communications experience, and she can help you further craft these messages and go through this process with you. And then for other McMaster affiliates, you may have faculty-specific resources, or you can contact media relations about promoting your work, particularly media engagement. So I hope this is helpful. You can take a photo of this, or you can email Michelle afterwards, or cress@mcmaster.ca, to point you in the right direction and make sure that you actually action the things that you want to do and get the internal support that you need. For any support that, we'll send follow-up emails. Perfect. In terms of producing any of the formats that I showed you, you've got my contact emails on the worksheet. And if there's anything that we can help you with at Research Retold, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us. In terms of the risks, here's where it's something that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily think about at the beginning, but something to consider around, what risk could prevent you from achieving your objectives? How will you deal with them? What is your plan A or plan B? And what are your lines to take? And what do I mean by this? In the last session, we talked about the fact that your research could be misinterpreted as one of the reasons to communicate your research beyond academia. And we talked about the fact that whether it's deliberate or accidental, research is misinterpreted by the media, and journalists kind of give their own spin, and it does affect how the public view your findings. So it's important that when people come looking for more information, they can find information that they can digest easily and kind of correct that mistake. So under risks here, a plan around a news outlet falsely reporting on your findings, then you might want to say, okay, my plan A would be to get in touch with that editor and highlight the error. And then plan B, I'm going to write a response on our blog addressing that error. So just really being prepared on how this could go wrong, because, it can go wrong. And then your research would really suffer if you haven't considered that. So a few minutes here, perhaps anyone has any thoughts about this topic, about your research or research in general being misinterpreted? Have you either been in a position or seen this go wrong with other researchers and had any thoughts about that? If anyone wanted to to share a few thoughts at this stage, you'd be very welcome. I realize we're getting close to the end of the session, so I won't keep you for too long, I promise.
I have an example of a colleague in the United States who wrote an academic article about Trump voters, and then it was picked up by Breitbart, or a right-wing media outlet, and that led to a lot of harassing emails and things on social media. And so in terms of risks, one of the risks of public engagement, particularly for women and people of color, is potential backlash. And so she had, she felt like she had to go through all of her social media to kind of protect her family and things. So it's not really about how your research could be misinterpreted as much as how it might be, it might land in a media market that is not its intended audience and be kind of twisted. And then you have to kind of protect yourself or your family or your university from kind of harassment if something like that happens.
That's very interesting. So if you think that your research could be in that situation, then definitely something to think about in terms of protecting yourself online. Brilliant. And then finally, in terms of evaluating success, and this is where it's so context specific to your particular research, but this is where you want to involve your research team and those who you're collaborating with to figure out how you will measure success, or how will you as a team say that you're satisfied with the things you have achieved. And you can look here at different quantitative or qualitative metrics. I've put a list of those in your worksheet around, is it event attendance, or how many people are visiting the website, how many donations you get, how many column inches, or is it more around in the focus groups or in the feedback forms, what are the things people are saying in terms of the actions that they're going to take, or how meaningful the communications or the research is to them, and kind of what specific actions they're going to take that will make their lives better. So something more qualitative about their own experience. And this is where you need to figure out what is most important to you in terms of your communication, and then just make a note of that, of how you're going to evaluate it. One other thing to know is that in your workbook, you do have a bit of further reading if you want to go through kind of different stages of your research, where you're at, the setup, sustain, post peer review, or spread phase, and where you're at in the research cycle and how you might have different research communication needs. So we've got a bit of information there that you can refer back to. Just wrapping up and saying that, we've spent 3 hours together by looking at these 5 building blocks of the communications plan, and then looked at the resources, risks, and evaluation. There's a bit more of a rush session with a few more technical glitches than last time, but I do thank you so much for your patience and for sticking around with us. Thank you so much for sticking until the end, guys. I'll email you separately for your postal address, and I'll send that to you. So that's it. That is the end of the session. It was such an honor to to present this to you and to get to know you over these last 2 weeks. It's been a very innovative format that we've developed with the team, so I'm glad that you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to working with you again. And do stay in touch. Don't be a stranger. Follow us on Research Retold and stay in touch.